All right, get ready to dive in, because today we're headed straight into the dazzling world of 1940s New York City.
Putting on our dancing shoes and everything?
Well, almost. We're stepping into the shoes of Vivian Morris, the unforgettable heart and soul of Elizabeth Gilbert's City of Girls.
Now that's a deep dive I can get behind. Unpacking an era filled with secrets, scandals, and yeah, maybe a little jazz too.
Oh, absolutely. And trust me, Vivian's story, it's anything but a dusty history lesson. Get ready for a wild ride through the glamorous, gritty, and let's be honest, sometimes scandalous underbelly of New York's theater scene.
It's like peeking behind the velvet curtain, isn't it?
Exactly. So imagine this. You're 19-year-old Vivian, fresh off the train from small-town Utica, New York. Your parents, at their wits' end, ship you off to live with your Aunt Peg, the oh-so-fabulous owner of none other than the Lily Playhouse.
And back then you have to remember, cities like New York, they were a beacon for dreamers and rebels, especially young people yearning to break free from those small-town chains.
Totally. And the Lily Playhouse, it's practically a character in itself. Picture this. Walls dripping with red velvet. Murals of, well, let's just say nymphs and satyrs. It's a glorious clash between a bordello and a Renaissance masterpiece.
Gilbert's descriptions are something else. You can practically smell the rouge and cold cream in the air. But behind all that glitz and glamour, you gotta remember this was a time when the theater world was, well, struggling.
Right.
For many performers, that lavish facade often hid financial instability and lifestyles that, let's just say, raised a few eyebrows back then.
They definitely didn't make it into the history books.
Mhm.
And speaking of raising eyebrows, Vivian finds herself smack dab in the middle of this whirlwind of personalities. There's Olive, the Take No Prisoner stage manager, Gladys, the gum-snapping dance captain,
And of course, we can't forget Celia Ray.
Celia Ray. Now, there is a woman who could command a stage with a single glance.
A true force of nature.
Vivian is absolutely smitten with her. Celia, with that gravelly voice and her seen-it-all attitude, she becomes both a friend and a mentor to Vivian. But, and you knew there was a but coming, their relationship, it's complicated.
To put it mildly, it really speaks to the limited options women had back then, especially in a world like the theater. Celia's mentorship, its guidance, sure, but there's also this element of, well, using Vivian to her own advantage.
Yeah, definitely a power dynamic at play. And that leads us to a topic that was often whispered about, but rarely discussed openly. Sex work. The showgirls at the Lily, they had their ways of, let's just say, making ends meet. They had their alternative arrangements.
And at the heart of this system was a certain Dr. Kellogg. Now, I know this might be a little jarring to hear, but it's essential to understand the context of the time.
I completely agree. So Vivian, being young and, shall we say, curious, ends up having her own encounter with this whole Dr. Kellogg situation.
Oh boy.
It's this incredibly awkward, anxiety-inducing, and honestly confusing experience for her. The things these girls had to do.
It really exposes the hypocrisy of the era, you know. Society clung to these strict moral codes on the surface. But behind closed doors, things were much more complicated, much more nuanced.
Oh, absolutely. And just as Vivian's starting to find her footing in this topsy-turvy world, guess what? The real world comes crashing, and World War II arrives at the Lily's doorstep. And with it, two incredibly intriguing characters, Edna Parker Watson and her husband, Arthur.
And Edna, with her effortlessly chic, almost androgynous style, she makes quite an impression on young Vivian. You can practically see the gears turning in Vivian's head, can't you? This sense of possibility, of breaking free from expectations.
It's like Edna opens a door to a whole new world just by being herself. And remember how we were talking about the war's impact on cities? Well, New York became a haven for many artists fleeing Europe, and Edna, she's a perfect example of that. Her arrival breathes new life into the Lily, inspiring Peg's ex-husband, the one and only playwright Billy Buell, to create a show.
And what's the name of the show, you ask?
Well, what else could it be but City of Girls?
How very meta.
Right. It's like the play within the novel mirrors what's happening in the world outside. This desire for escape, for finding joy in the midst of chaos, it reflects those anxieties of wartime. It shows the power of art to offer a much-needed distraction. And talk about a whirlwind. Billy's writing like a man possessed, the plot's wilder than a runaway trolley car, rehearsals. Utter chaos.
Yeah.
Honestly, you just reading about it, it's electric.
That wartime energy, right. Create, find joy, find escape while the world's falling apart around you.
Exactly. The show must go on, right? And speaking of things that must go on, remember Vivian's little crush? It's more of an infatuation, really, with Anthony Rochella, the impossibly arrogant leading man.
Ah, Anthony. Their whole fling, it's like a powder keg, isn't it? All wrapped up in the changing world around them. Don't forget it's the 1940s, right? Women, they're supposed to be proper, follow the rules.
Right.
But Vivian, she's got Celia and Edna whispering in her ear, and she's starting to question those rules, figure out what she wants.
And I think Anthony's definitely her way of testing those boundaries, you know? But like all things, it crashes down eventually. That scandal we talked about with Arthur, Edna's husband, remember?
Yeah.
Vivian gets caught in this whole mess of betrayal and jealousy, fueled by one too many gin cocktails, probably.
Classic recipe for disaster right there.
Yeah.
But it also kind of makes you think about the double standard back then, Arthur, he's a man, nothing really happens to him. But Vivian,
Oh, she's crucified.
publicly shamed, labeled a homewrecker, it's a different world.
And leading the charge on that public shaming, none other than Walter Winchell.
Winchell, the OG gossip columnist, millions of readers. Think about it, today it's tweets and TikToks, back then it was Winchell's column, one scathing paragraph and your reputation's toast.
Wild, isn't it? How some things change and some things stay the same. So after that whole debacle, Vivian hightails it back to Clinton, totally crushed, completely lost.
Rock bottom, really. Going through the motions, that failed engagement, her parents are heartbroken. And through it all, she's carrying this weight of judgment, trying to cram herself back into the box everyone expects.
But you can tell she's just playing a part, right? Like a piece of her. It's still back in that crazy, exhilarating world of the Lilly Playhouse.
Oh, absolutely. And just when you think she's destined for a life of quiet desperation, bam, a lifeline. The phone rings. It's a way back to the city that broke her heart, but also set her free.
Who's on the other end of the line?
Aunt Peg. Who else? But this isn't about reminiscing about the good old days. Nope, this is the war effort, darling. Everyone's got a role to play, even former showgirls.
So instead of the dazzling lights of the Lilly Playhouse, we're talking.
A makeshift stage.
Hello.
Brooklyn Navy Yard cafeteria.
Oh, wow.
Right. Instead of those elaborate costumes and sets, think vegetable crates for props and a honky-tonk piano that's seen better days.
Wow. Talk about making do.
But that's wartime for you, right? You adapt, you get resourceful, you find creativity in the most unexpected places.
That's incredible. So Vivian dives headfirst into this new world, putting on shows for these exhausted workers, navigating awkward encounters. And of course, because life is full of surprises, who does she bump into on the subway? But Edna Parker Watson herself.
Talk about a blast from the past, but Edna, she's a class act through and through. No drama, no rehashing old wounds. Just a nod, a flicker of recognition, and then they each go their separate ways.
Very mature Edna. But Vivian's life is far from glamorous now. It's all about survival, long hours, sending money back home to her parents, and trying to outrun those ghosts of her past. And then, as if things couldn't get any tougher, she gets word that her brother Walter has been killed in action.
The war hits home. You feel Vivian's world shift, that weight of loss pulling at her. She finds comfort of a sort in a relationship with Jim, a decent guy who represents stability, acceptance.
He even proposes, knowing all about her past. It's like he's offering her an escape hatch, a chance to reclaim a normal life.
A lot of women faced that choice back then, didn't they? Society's expectations versus their own happiness.
And Vivian, standing there on the eve of her wedding, in a dress that feels more like a costume than ever, she has this realization.
Epiphany time.
She can't do it. Not to Jim, not to herself.
It's like she finally throws off those chains, She refuses to be defined by her past or what people expect.
So the engagement's off, but not before one final liberating fling with Jim, just to prove a point. Talk about leaving a lasting impression. And that right there, that's Vivian's turning point. She goes back to New York City, but this time it's different.
This time she's not running from anything, is she? It's like she's finally free to chase what she wants.
Exactly. And the New York after the war, it's buzzing, a whole new energy.
A world of possibilities.
Right. But this time around, it's not the bright lights of Broadway calling her name. Remember Marjorie, the costume shop owner's daughter from back near the Lilly?
Oh, Marjorie with the eye for style. How could I forget?
Well, she's got this brilliant idea, see? She wants to open a bridal boutique.
Now that's interesting. It really speaks to those changing times, Women, they'd stepped into those traditionally male roles during the war and afterward. They weren't about to just go back into the kitchen.
Tell me about it. And Marjorie and Vivian, they were a force of nature, let me tell you. Their bridal boutique, L'Atelier, it becomes this haven for brides. Imagine, you're not just picking something off a rack. You're working with these two women who've seen it all, done it all.
They encouraged individuality, self-expression, at a time when a lot of brides probably felt pressure to conform.
Exactly. But of course, it wouldn't be a Vivian Morris story without a few surprises along the way, right? Remember Frank, that young soldier from the very beginning, the one who was with Walter.
Oh, Frank. Yeah, what about him?
He comes back into Vivian's life years later, and their reunion. Phew, talk about baggage.
They carried so much weight between them, didn't they? Walter's death, the guilt, the grief.
So much left unsaid. And yet, there's this connection, this shared history, this shared loss. They start taking these long walks together through the city, sharing stories, finding comfort in each other's company.
New York City has a way of bringing people together like that.
It does, doesn't it? And on one of those walks, Frank finally tells Vivian the truth about the night Walter died. And it's heartbreaking, truly heartbreaking.
What happened?
It turns out he was just trying to impress Walter,
Right.
trying to fit in. But his words, they had these unintended consequences.
Oh, wow.
And Vivian, being Vivian with an incredible capacity for forgiveness, she lets it go.
That's powerful. It says a lot about her, about their connection.
It does. But just as they're finding solace in each other's company, Frank, he just disappears, vanishes. Years go by. Vivian builds her life, her business. Then, out of the blue, she gets a letter. It's from Frank's daughter, Angela, telling her that Frank has passed away.
Bittersweet, I imagine.
Oh, definitely. And reading that letter, it makes Vivian think about their time together, those walks, those conversations, all that unspoken grief and regret. So she does something incredibly Vivian. She reaches out to Angela.
What does she say?
Well, she offers to make Angela's wedding dress.
Wow.
I know. It's like this beautiful, selfless act. A way of connecting with Frank one last time,
By creating something for his daughter, a piece of beauty, a piece of hope.
Exactly. And as Vivian's finishing up the dress, she thinks about her life, her loves, all the twists and turns. And she says this line, it just stayed with me. She says, "The world ain't straight." And you know what? She's right. Life, it rarely goes according to plan.
That's the beauty of it, though, isn't it? All those unexpected detours and dead ends. It's how we grow, how we learn.
It is. And Vivian's story. It's a reminder that happiness, it can be found in the most unexpected places. And sometimes the most fulfilling relationships are the ones that defy definition. So there you have it, folks. That's Vivian Morris for you. A woman who dared to live life on her own terms, and in doing so, taught us all a thing or two about freedom, resilience, and the power of staying true to yourself.